Here we go. All right, folks will be starting to join here momentarily. Welcome in, everybody. Happy to have everyone with us. We'll get the presentation started in just a minute or two. We just like to make sure we get everyone in, those last few stragglers, but here come some folks now to get the conversation started. Before I even give my table setting spiel, let's get the conversation started with everyone. If you wouldn't mind dropping in the chat your name and where you're calling in from, so we can get an idea of the scope of interest and global reach. That would be great to have from everyone. And I'll get that started. Raquel from Nyack, New York. Welcome, Raquel. Oh, and Gary, I see that was to just me.
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
No.
Hello. Hi, Alicia from Medina, Ohio, very close to Gary and I.
Right down the road.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Alicia, how did you find us? It's unusual that people from our own hometown
this close. Yeah, we're usually a couple hours away.
Or a couple days away. I mean,
true.
Yeah. Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome.
Wow, nice. Awesome. We've got Daniel from Texas, just north of Dallas. Welcome in.
Another from Bern, North Carolina. New Bern, sorry. I teach entrepreneurship at CVCA. I don't know what that means, but
Cuyahoga Valley Community College.
Yeah,
I think so. Hi, Dana. Nice to see you. She and I just had a lovely chat last week, and hopefully we'll have some more good, productive chats. Glad you were able to join us.
Cuyahoga Valley Christian Academy. Awesome.
Christian Academy. Nice. Fantastic. Yep. Okay, we've got a decent amount of folks. As more people trickle in, I'll remind them to throw their names in the chat as well. But just to get things set, as you probably heard when we started the webinar, we are recording this, and we will share that recording with you typically within 24 hours of the presentation closing. I'm actually going to turn captions on now, so those will be listed on the YouTube recording when we're done. We'll also provide you with the slides for this presentation. So the hope is you can sit back, relax, take it all in, and ask questions as you go. If you've been to these before, I'm going to do things a little bit differently and keep my camera on and be a little more interactive with Gary as we go to bring in the audience voice. So feel free to add any questions, points of clarification, pushback throughout, and where it makes sense, I'll jump in and bring those in or clarify things that I think might need a bit more clarification. But we really want to make this an interactive dialogue rather than being didactic towards you as much as possible.
That's the idea.
Yes, sir.
Welcome Youngstown.
Mia.
Mia from Decatur. Mia, how did you find us in Decatur? Did that come from who are our friends in Decatur? The names just went on my head.
Juanita and Jeremy.
Juanita and Jeremy.
Morris.
We've got some
Dr. Morris, great.
Awesome. Those guys are rock stars.
They really are. And you're doing a talk with them not in the not too distant future, I believe. So that's exciting.
Okay. I just go wherever you guys tell me to go.
Exactly. All right. Well, without further ado, let's kick this shebang off, Gary, and I'll be here to keep the conversation going. But
sounds great. Sounds great. Thank you, Nick, and thanks everyone for joining us. I love doing this. I love the interaction with people and sharing these ideas and getting the reaction. So, as Nick said, I'm hoping you guys feel like you can jump in, raise your hand, say something. I'll put a couple pauses in here where we can actually stop to have a dialogue. But if something pops in your mind, Nick will interrupt me, whatever. So welcome to this. My name is Gary Schoeniger. I'm the founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. We are the world's leading provider of entrepreneurial mindset education, training, professional development, and organizational development programs. That's what we do. I'm going to jump in here, share some slides with you very briefly, and to talk a little bit about our work, and then we'll jump from there. Nick, just give me the thumbs up. We okay
Yep.
with the slides? Looking good?
Things are looking good. Yep.
All right. So this webinar is really focused on how to cultivate entrepreneurial mindsets in classrooms, organizations, and communities. And those are the three areas we generally focus on. We're more of a B2B company. We don't necessarily, work with specific individuals. We're trying to, create broader impact here. But the basic idea here that I want to share with you is I've been fascinated with and studying this basic idea for more than 30 years, which is essentially, how do underdogs win? And I just wanted to give you that background. I don't really think of entrepreneurship through the lens of a business discipline. I look at it as a behavioral phenomenon. And I'm not really interested in the mindset and the methods of Elon Musk or Richard Branson or Steve Jobs or what have you. And that's fine. Whatever they do, they do. But I've really been interested in, how do ordinary people who don't have access to power and privilege and authority, resources, what have you, how do ordinary people who have no particular advantage in life, how do they manage to create value? How do they manage to alter their place in the socioeconomic structure? How do they recognize opportunities that the rest of us overlook? How do they marshal the resources and the resilience to make things happen in spite of their circumstances? That's really where my focus has been. It's really on the extraordinary ability of ordinary people. And that's really a kind of cutting to the end there. But so the big questions I want to get to here, like, what specifically is an entrepreneurial mindset? Why is it important? And then more importantly, how can we develop it in ourselves and others? And that's really what all of our work is centered around. And those are the questions I'm going to try to address in this webinar, and give you plenty of time to engage in some dialogue with us. But the premise that I'm operating from is that the world has changed in ways that now require all of us to be more innovative and entrepreneurial. And another way of saying this is that the mindset that once enabled us to succeed is becoming increasingly irrelevant, or I think a better word is maladaptive. In this increasingly volatile, rapidly changing world, that what I would call the managerial mindset, and I sort of see that as the other side of the coin, is no longer going to get us where we want to go. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying abandon managerial thinking and we all embrace entrepreneurial thinking. I see them as the different sides of the same coin. And so another way of saying what I'm saying is that the managerial mindset is necessary, but it's no longer sufficient. And so let's just leave it at that for now. We can engage in some dialogue if you have more questions about that. But backing up, for a second, there are two distinct worldviews nested in each. And the behavior of the managerial minded and the behavior of the entrepreneurial minded are rooted in deeply held, mostly unconscious values and assumptions of which the individuals themselves are not likely aware. And so that's where the mindset component comes into it, but I'm getting ahead of myself. When we look at what I now call entrepreneurials, which is my tongue-in-cheek joke or pun on millennials, when we look at entrepreneurial people, what we see are people who are creative and critical thinkers. They're resilient, they're resourceful. They know how to identify and actualize opportunities, even in the most opportunity-constrained environments. and they possess these attitudes and skills that the world now demands, these attitudes and skills that we want to cultivate in ourselves, but attitudes and skills that we want to cultivate in our children, in our students, in our workforce, and in our communities. And so that's how I'm thinking about entrepreneurship. Now, the causal narrative around entrepreneurial behavior is steeped in all kinds of myth and misunderstanding, and a lot of us sort of default to trait-based assumptions about the underlying causes of entrepreneurial behavior. And if you want to ask more about that, I'm happy to do so in the chat, but let me just suffice it to say that the literature just doesn't support those assumptions. And psychologists have tried for years to connect entrepreneurial behavior with dispositional traits, and it's just not really a very powerful correlation.
Oh, Gary, your camera turned off.
Okay, what did I just do? Hold on. There it is.
There we go.
Thank you, Nick. Glad you
Yeah, no
noticed
problem.
that,
And
'cause I would've
actually,
just kept-
can I jump in on the
Yeah,
dispositional traits? Because for anyone who might have missed it, we had a really engaging conversation with the folks at the EMP, the Entrepreneurial Mindset Profile, a couple of weeks ago. And they largely agree with a lot of our kind of situational factors that Gary's going to outline. But what their work does is point out the dispositional traits that can lead to an entrepreneurial mindset, but they are not required to achieve that. It just is kind of like getting someone a jump start, if you will. So I just like to make sure that people understand there's more parallels there. And it's not to say that dispositional traits are irrelevant. It's just not the root cause most of the time. And we'll definitely be getting into that.
Yeah, and I think, Nick, it's a good point. And the idea is basically, that we're all kind of going along doing our thing, assuming that the Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musks of this world just sort of pop out every once in a while for reasons that are sort of beyond our control. And what my research has led me to understand is that non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned. That we're all born like naturally inquisitive, creative, growth-oriented, and we learn not to do that for a host of reasons, some of which are societal influence, some of which are internal. But I'm getting off the rails again.
Yes, sorry. Anyway, to continue.
But the idea here is that, students need to learn to think like entrepreneurs. Like, regardless of their chosen path, every student needs to have some basic entrepreneurial competencies. And these are the competencies that will enable them to distinguish themselves in a crowded, ever-changing world. Like, as this quote that I like from the World Economic Forum, it's like, not enough to add entrepreneurship on the perimeter. It needs to be at the core of the way education operates. And that's certainly the biggest sector that we serve. And that's because that's the most important lever we can pull to make an impact in our communities. But organizational leaders also need to embrace what I now call entrepreneurial leadership. You need to recognize the latent, untapped entrepreneurial potential that lies dormant within their organizations. And I'm happy to tell you more about case studies or other work we're doing in the realm of leadership and organizational development, but also in communities more broadly speaking, like not only for workforce development initiatives, but also small business development initiatives. There's a lot more we can do to foster entrepreneurial thinking in our communities, and that a lot of our clients are in the nonprofit space and the workforce development space doing work there as well. So that's that. Our work is centered around two important ideas, and that's what I'm going to sort of introduce in this webinar today. One is the redefining of entrepreneurship, and to redefine it in a way that anyone can embrace. Now, if you were to quickly Google search entrepreneurship, what you're most likely to find are the 300-year-old to 250-year-old definition of entrepreneurship, the entrepreneur as someone who organizes and operates a business. Maybe you'll find a more recent one that says like someone who takes a risk in exchange for a profit. Or maybe you'll find the Harvard, I forgot the guy's name, but it's kind of a clunky definition. It's somebody who pursues opportunities without regard for resources currently controlled. That's probably the most accurate. It's a bit clunky. But when you think of the entrepreneur as someone who takes a risk in exchange for a profit, I don't see that. I don't see evidence for that. And I think that's a misnomer. That's really, some people do that. They put a lot of money on the table and they take big risks, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And that's a really narrow definition of entrepreneurship. And in my observation and analysis of hundreds of what I would call everyday unlikely entrepreneurs, I don't see that. There's a purpose-driven component, and to just say this profit-oriented is misguided. And I'm going in too deep here too soon. But the second big idea is put some structure around the idea of a mindset. We throw that word around very casually without really understanding what a mindset is and how it influences our behavior without our awareness. And that's really the two important ideas. So I'm going to dig into each very briefly, and then we can stop and have a discussion about this. So let's start with the redefinition of entrepreneurship. We hear the word entrepreneur and that conjures something in our mind. And very often this is the availability heuristic, I think, is what Daniel Kahneman, it's what easily retrieved information. And if we hear the word entrepreneur and we think of the venture-backed high-growth billionaire types, that's a really, really limited understanding, not only of how to be entrepreneurial, but about who can be entrepreneurial. Some people think of it as a small business owner, that's fine. But what the programs that support small business often do is they tend to conflate entrepreneurial attitudes and skills with managerial attitudes and skills. And it sort of jumbles it up into a soup it's just not really effective. And part of what we've done in our research is disentangled those two things. It took me a long time to figure this out, but the attitudes and skills required to discover opportunities are almost entirely distinct from the attitudes and skills required to exploit that opportunity, the latter being managerial, the former being entrepreneurial. So, to use the words of Elon Musk himself, I'm going to break this down into first principles. And to do that, I'm going to use this idea called transformation theory, which came from a systems thinker named Dr. George Land. And he came up with transformation theory as a way to explain the nature of change within any living system. And I think it's quite helpful to explain entrepreneurship. And so it works like this. What Land is saying, there are three phases of change. There's a discovery phase, there's a growth phase, and then there's an obsolescence phase. Or in some cases, that obsolescence phase becomes a reinvention phase, right? What he's saying that's really important is that each of these three phases requires distinct rules for survival. And the key to survival is understanding which phase you are in so that you know which rules to apply, because they are not interchangeable. And if you look up the word maladaptive, it essentially means the tendency to cling to a set of rules and assumptions and values that once worked, but ignoring the contextual changes that have occurred. So anyway, these orange dots are what land calls breakpoints, and they represent the moment in time when the rules for survival change. Now, they're quite clear and obvious in this graphic representation, but in real life, they are rarely so. Just side note. So in what land is saying in the exploration phase, like the organism, whether that's a plant, an animal, an organism or an animal or a human. In the discovery phase, the organism is searching for a connection with its environment. And I will argue that as humans, we connect with our environment by making ourselves useful to others. I mean, that's how we, as Adam Smith once said, everyone lives by exchanging. So we're all merchants in some sense, right? So we go off to school, we learn how to become useful, we get a degree, which is essentially what happens. That's the first break point. We now, the exploration phase is over, and now we go out into the world and we replicate the knowledge and the skills we've gained in order to grow or advance in our career, basically. We get better and better at the useful thing. We scale it so we can grow. And then at some point, the second break point is reached when the growth starts to slow. And at this point, this is an indication that we're either fading into obsolescence, maybe we're about to retire, or it's time to reinvent ourselves. The problems arise at this second break point, and this is where the mindset becomes really relevant, that we often respond inappropriately to these adaptive challenges, to these adaptive changes. And we do that by becoming angry. We go into denial. We want to go back to the way it was. We blame others. This is something Land pointed out. We go into a siege mentality, and we tend to double down on prior beliefs. We jettison non-essential projects, non-essential personnel. We go back to basics, right? And that might work for a minute, but it actually contributes to the descent into obsolescence in a lot of cases. We're clinging to beliefs and failing to acknowledge the change in the environment.
Can I jump in real quick there,
Yeah,
Gary?
yeah.
Just one thing, I believe you even mentioned this, but just to highlight it, this is applicable to an organization as well. This is true of any system, whether that system is the organic system of our body, all the way up to a multinational conglomerate. You still go through
Society.
these phases of development. Society in general, exactly. We tend to talk about it as the individual because we're applying it to an entrepreneurial mindset. But to Gary's point earlier, the points being made here are relevant to a group of any size as well.
Yeah, correct. And so the question becomes the question of the day really is, how do we learn how to make ourselves useful to others outside of known systems? That's really where the entrepreneurial mindset comes into play. But for now, this took me a long time to get to this definition, but using transformation theory as a basis, I now define entrepreneurship as the self-directed pursuit of opportunities to create value for others. And by creating value for others, we empower ourselves. And that empowerment is not just economic. By pursuing the things that interest us and developing our abilities in ways that contribute to our communities, that contribute to the greater good, we tap into the essential ingredients that are essential for reaching our full potential. This is coming from self-determination theory, and I won't get into that. But I guess I'll go back to my trait-based conversation. when a human being is able to pursue his or her interests and develop his or her abilities in ways that contribute to the greater good, they unwittingly stumble into the most potent form of human motivation known to man. They become what Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called optimal engagement. And that's really what this is all about. So the second idea here is understanding the mindset, like what it is. And here again, I struggled with this for a long time. I mean, there's not a lot in the literature. There's not a lot there's no real clear clinical understanding of what a mindset actually is. And through my own persistence and casting a wide net, it finally occurred to me that mindset is to a person what culture is to a group. It functions exactly the same way, whether you study organizational culture or more broadly speaking. You can look at anthropology and replace the word culture for mindset, and it more or less works the same way. So all this is to say is that a mindset enables us to function without thinking. It enables us to think without thinking. So the way our brains work is once we learn something, we accept something to be the correct way to perceive, think, and feel, our brains relegate that schema, that idea, that method, that process to habitual control in order to reduce the cognitive load. And that enables us to function efficiently. That's the purpose of a mindset. It enables us to think without thinking. You ever drive to work or the grocery store talking to your friend on the phone and you don't remember how you got there? That's what I'm talking about. You're on autopilot. And the brain does that naturally, automatically, in order to reduce cognitive load. So I took Schein's definition of culture and translated it into a definition for mindset, which is a pattern of values, beliefs, and assumptions learned by an individual that has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore assumed to be the correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to a problem or the pursuit of a particular goal. That's our definition of mindset. There's two things I want to draw your attention to. Our mindset regulates our ability to optimize our inherent capabilities. And I use this tried and true thing that Warren Buffett once said, which is, you got a guy over here with a 400 horsepower engine, but he only knows how to get 100 horsepower out of his engine. And we all know people like that, right? They're too smart for their own good. And then you got a guy over here who's got a 200 horsepower engine, but he knows how to get all 200 horsepower out of the engine. It has nothing to do with anything but the underlying values, assumptions, and beliefs and mental models held by the individual. That's really what I'm saying here. And when we look at these everyday entrepreneurs, these are people that aren't necessarily scholars or not necessarily straight A students. These are people that know they're optimally engaged and therefore they know how to get all the horsepower out of whatever capabilities they have. But the second area of mindset that's important is that it tends to hinder our ability to adapt in the face of change. So if you think about this from an evolutionary perspective, our mindset is a feature when you want the future to look like the past. You're just getting better and better and better at doing the thing. So from an evolutionary perspective, it's a feature. Where it becomes a bug is when the future doesn't look like the past. And that's why we're not evolved for this rate of change, this accelerated rate of change, which is like a hockey stick. Whereas the human ability to adapt is more of a gradual slope. So what happens is a mindset becomes just that. It becomes a mindset, a fixed way of thinking that creates a powerful incentive to draw from the past in order to navigate the future. And that's where we get stuck. So here's a quick model to illustrate how it works. On the surface, and this is right out of Edgar Schein's playbook here in Study of Organizational Culture. On the surface are the visible artifacts and observable behaviors. Beneath the surface, this is what we know that we know, and that what we say that we value, our espoused values. But deep at the base of the iceberg, we find our deeply held values and taken for granted assumptions of which we're not likely aware. And what anthropologists will tell you is that what shows up on the surface is much less likely to be caused by your level 2 knowledge and values, and is much more likely to be the result of your deeply held values and taken for granted assumptions of which you may or may not be aware. Another way to think about this is, what you do speaks so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. I think that was Cervantes. Who said that, Nick? Do you remember who said that? I don't know. That wasn't Cervantes.
Yeah, that one is escaping me too. Sorry.
Yeah, but you get the general idea, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so a big part of our work is helping people understand their own deeply held values and assumptions and bring them up from level 3 up to level 2, where we can look at them in broad daylight and then compare them with the deeply held values and assumptions of an entrepreneur. That's really what this work is all about. So those are the 2 big ideas. I'm going to pause here. What questions do you guys have? Comments, suggestions, pushback? Uh-oh.
We'll give folks a minute here to chime in. But again, I just want to reiterate, and no worries, if you have comments later, feel free to throw those in. Okay, someone's throwing in. Okay, Janine is asking, my big question is about how to cultivate it in others. Well, boy, do we have a treat for you, Janine. That's exactly where we're going after this kind of question break. So if anyone has questions about the content we've already discussed, let us know. And we'll be happy to do so. Also, just wanted to highlight, I threw out one link to George Land's work where we kind of first heard about his concept of breakpoints, called Breakpoint and Beyond. I threw a link to that book on Amazon out there for you. It's pretty affordable there if you want to take a deeper dive.
Good idea, Nick.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one question.
The other comment I wanted to make is or question I want to ask you all, this definition of entrepreneurship as the self-directed pursuit of opportunity to create value for others.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that resonates with me, not only because I've distilled that from the observations and analysis of hundreds of everyday entrepreneurs, the underdogs, if you will, but it's a definition that anyone can embrace. I met a lady, we were doing some church facilitator training in Jacksonville, Florida State College at Jacksonville last week. And a lady got up and talked about, when she was a kid, she couldn't find a job, so she went to work washing dishes in a restaurant. She applied as a server. They said, we don't have server jobs, we have dishwasher. She said, okay. But immediately, this is Dee Gay, Nick, Dee.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
An amazing story. And she said, well, okay, I took the dishwasher job, but then I started looking at there's some things we could do to make the salad bar a little more enticing, and just try. And the next thing she's running the place.
Mm-hmm.
It really comes down to that definition is about, okay, I got to follow the basic rules here. but it's up to me to make myself as useful as possible to the people within, my environment and my immediate environment. Anyone, you can have a job at Taco Bell and you can embrace that. It's not. So I guess, Nick, the point that I'm trying to make here is we've got to expand our thinking of entrepreneurship. As someone who just starts a business. We've got to understand these ideas can certainly help people who want to start a business. These ideas can certainly drastically reduce the failure rate of people who want to start businesses. But we're asking people to think beyond startup and understand the broader implications of entrepreneurial thinking as an essential life skill, I guess.
Okay, we've as you were saying that, we've got some really good meaty questions, so let's get into a few of them. I'm going to ask them slightly out of order just because of relevance to the comments you were just making.
Okay.
So I'll start with Dana said, if entrepreneurial mindset is predicated on creating value for others, is there a level 3 assumption that we should desire this, that we should produce for others? And then are there limitations to this line of thinking?
Well, I mean, absolutely, we should introduce people to this idea. And look, it's a great question, but the thing I want to point out is something that scholars and thinkers for millennia have said. The desire to fulfill human needs through our own efforts is an essential part of what makes us human. Non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned. We're not meant to just do routinized tasks in exchange for a paycheck. Mm-hmm. That's not how we're wired. Not everyone.
The assembly line isn't conducive to human activity. Yeah.
It's not conducive to human flourishing.
Good. Yes. Good clarification. And actually, Dana asked, further clarified, are there ways that the entrepreneurial mindset can lead to an exploitation of the entrepreneur or the others, which gives us a great opportunity, Gary, to talk about the altruistic paradox, as we coined.
It is. And that's how I think of it. This is something that is inherent in nature. It's in our nature. This isn't something that there's some philosophical idea that I'm trying to impose on you. Mm-hmm. I'm saying, don't take my word for it. Go out in your spare time and try to turn $50 into 500 by doing something useful that you care about. Right. And see how your level of engagement changes. I mean,
which is not to say that we don't need space for rest and recreation. I think that may be where Dana, your question is coming from. It's not to say that you need to be nose to the grindstone, constantly thinking about others in service. The reason I brought up the term altruistic paradox is by serving others, you're inherently serving yourself, both through the dopamine that you'll receive by producing value for others. And by producing, we don't just mean making a widget, having your Etsy shop or anything of that nature, but by creating value for the community around you.
Yeah.
But then it's also further emphasizing the value that you're creating for others, inherently making you an integral part of the society you inhabit.
But there's another way to address Dana's question, I think, Nick, and Dana, correct me if I'm wrong where you're going with this, but Kant had this thing he wrote in this essay about what is enlightenment. And he made this statement about people stay in this state of dependence long after they've been set free, not because they're incapable, but because they're not really paying attention. I mean, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, which is what makes it so easy for other people to set themselves up as their guardians. Yes, there are some people that become entrepreneurs and they quickly find out how easy it is to exploit people. But So I think I understand, if that's where I understand where you're coming from, which sort of makes my case why every student needs to understand these principles to be less vulnerable to those things.
Not
More
only
broadly,
that, I would also argue that the exploitation is where someone who once arrived at a opportunity to exploit, and by exploit we mean that in the purest term of to replicate, to continue
right.
to essentially make the thing happen. In that setting, if they move into exploiting others, they're essentially divorcing themselves from that inherent entrepreneurial mindset and moving into something else entirely. They might have come to it from that more altruistic paradox, but when you move into that pure, heartless businessman trope that we might see in media, that's moving away from what I think we would define as true entrepreneurial behavior.
Yeah, I would agree. So anyway, I don't want to belabor that question too long.
Yes,
Nick, what
yes.
else do we have in there?
Definitely, definitely. And I think that several of these are going to be somewhat answered in the next section, but I'll ask them to get our wheels spinning.
Sure.
Uh Ayodele Shitu is saying, I am a teacher and I appreciate the idea that mindset is a series of deep-rooted values that we are unaware of. Are there ways of stimulating that awareness of those values? And then in relation to that question, Benson is asking, what is an effective method of getting past self-limiting beliefs? I think those two are kind of interrelated.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it comes back to, I'm going to answer this in the next section. You're right, Nick, and I want to get into that. But it's really about, encouraging self-reflection, like helping people understand that the ways in which our deeply held beliefs create the outcomes in our lives. It's not always apparent to us. And that's the hard part. Like, what we want people to do is think about their own thinking. And what we tend to do is we look at entrepreneurs and think they're lucky or they're gifted or right place, right time, and that we don't realize, no, it's this underlying logic that's driving a behavior that enabled them to get these outcomes. And if we embrace this logic and emulate this behavior, we'll more or less get the similar outcomes. So, good to press on here, Nick?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely think so. We'll get into more depth in those as well.
Okay, so what we have now, what I want to come to is, what we call the Ice House method. And this is really around how do people who have no particular authority, privilege, anything that enables them to stand out, how do they, let's say, recognize, evaluate, and bring ideas to life in ways that benefit them and the organizations and the communities that they inhabit. So let's call this the Ice House method. And this was inspired, the Ice House came from a book that I co-wrote in 2010 with Clifton Talbert as a part of a research project I was doing for Cisco, the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute. And I stumbled across Clifton's story and the influence of an unlikely entrepreneur and how that altered the trajectory of his life from his early childhood in the cotton fields of the Mississippi Delta to becoming an internationally recognized author and entrepreneur. That's where that comes from. This book we just crossed 100,000 copies sold. It's really gone all over the world. It's really been quite gratifying to see. And with some initial funding from Kauffman, we created a curriculum around it that's now being used in classrooms and communities around the world. And so I want to give you a brief insight into that methodology here that was inspired by that book and that program. And it's really pretty straightforward. And it comes from the observations and analysis. This is what entrepreneurs are actually doing. So we start by redefining entrepreneurship so people can have a common language and a common understanding. That's kind of the starting point, redefining it in a way that everyone can participate. Introduce these 8 core competencies that we've distilled from hundreds of interviews, and I'll show you those in a moment. Then immerse the learner in what we call the opportunity discovery process, which is another way of saying entrepreneurial process. We expose the learner to relatable social models, and this is part of our secret sauce, if you will. But if you want to get people to embrace this new behavior, they've got to see people who come from similar or worse circumstances succeeding in such endeavors, or they're just not going to do it. I mean, it's really, that's a big part of what makes Ice House work. We want to encourage personal reflection, and that's what some of the comments were earlier about thinking about your own thinking. And lastly, you can't teach this stuff with the same mindset and same methods as traditional learning. You can't be the expert. You got to go be the guide on the side. You got to embrace facilitation. So redefining entrepreneurship, that's really simple. You can use the S curve if you want, but what you want people to understand is this is just the autonomous pursuit of opportunity to create value for others. You have to figure out how to make yourself useful to another human being without the guidance of a professional teacher, without a predetermined path with a predictable outcome. That's essentially what it is. Then we introduce these 8 core competencies that we've gleaned from just hundreds of entrepreneurs from all over the world. I could tell you story after story. Starts with a vision, the power to choose, the understanding that by solving problems for others, we empower ourselves, looking for problems to solve, reorienting our focus. Now, remember, here's a mindset moment. Our brains filter out everything deemed irrelevant and non-threatening. So if you're not looking for problems to solve for other people, you're just not likely to find them. What we see in entrepreneurs, they learn by doing. They try lots of things on a small scale. They learn by doing rather than careful planning and in-depth research. They're learning all the time. They're not necessarily learning through traditional means, but they're learning machines. They're reliable. They're resourceful. They surround themselves in entrepreneurial communities that gives them a huge lift in terms of transmitting the core values of entrepreneurial thinking and process. And lastly, they're optimistic. They develop this ability to persist, which is kind of connected back to the choice they made, right? It's about optimism. And really, there's so much depth. I could do an hours-long seminar on each of these ideas. I'm just really skimming across the top here. We want to immerse them in the discovery process. We've developed a tool called the Ice House Opportunity Discovery Canvas that's designed them to immerse them. It's like a divining rod with some general questions to guide them through the process. 4, we expose them to relatable social models. We have some video content. If you don't have access to our video library, you go out into your community, and there are these Ice House entrepreneurs are in every community, and 9 times out of 10, they'll come in and speak to your students if you ask them to. And then lastly, we want to encourage personal reflection and remind the learner that a mindset is a belief system that is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. I mean, that's really it, to think about your own thinking. And then lastly, you as the facilitator, we want you to embrace facilitation using these principles of guided mastery that came from Albert Bandura's work at Stanford. Encourage small wins, expose the learner to relatable models. You need to play the role of a mentor or a guide, not the sage on the stage. And we need to help the learner manage their emotional response and manage their inner dialogue so they don't give up or so they don't quit prematurely. that's the basic methodology. And you know, we launched this at the Kauffman Foundation. I think it was 2011 when we did our first training there.
I think that's about right. Yeah.
And since that time, more than 3,500 facilitators from around the world have been trained. In late April, Rob and I and Joni would just train 200 career and technical TVET teachers in South Africa in April. So there's, you know, thousands of trained facilitators implementing these ideas in classrooms and communities around the world. Just give you one quick testimonial. We hear this over and over again, comments just like this from Dan. The Ice House training was phenomenal and was a phenomenal experience. Even as a seasoned entrepreneur, I learned a lot and really appreciated the broad application of the program. This material is relevant for any individual or group. The feedback we get from our facilitator training is the most common things we hear. This is life-changing. This is transformational. That's really all this work is about, is the helping people like look at the world through a different lens. And as I like to say, you know, an entrepreneurial mindset only seems mysterious to us to the extent that we are steeped in managerial thinking. And the opposite is true. To the lifelong entrepreneur, you know, managerial thinking is a head scratch. Like, I just don't understand it, right? What we're saying is that in today's rapidly changing world, it's not one or the other, it's both. The key to survival, if you're a student, if you're a worker, if you're a leader of an organization or an aspiring entrepreneur, the key to survival is understanding which phase you are in so that you know which mindset to apply. So that's it. I'm going to pause it here. I'm going to give you a quick 30-second overview of our work. In addition to the Ice House curriculum, we offer keynotes and workshops, and those are very effective for exposing large, you know, groups of people to the basic ideas. And then from there, we can figure out who raises their hand and says, yeah, I want to be part of something, or this is, you know, sign me up. So we offer the keynotes and workshops. We also offer facilitator training, and that's kind of what I just gave you an overview of. That's for folks that want to learn how to cultivate an entrepreneurial mindset, not only in themselves, but in others. And we do that both online and in person. We do private trainings. We also have 3 or 4 public online facilitator trainings every year. The next one is in July, from July 6th through 27th. There are 4 live 2-hour sessions, lots of other offline work. I think we have some seats left, but that July training is filling up quickly. Mm-hmm. So if you're interested in that, you know, time's a wasting. And then lastly, we also do some work in leadership and organizational development, primarily with community colleges and school districts, but at the leadership level, like how to bring entrepreneurial thinking into the leadership level of the organization. So that's who we are. That's what we do. I think we've got some time left for questions, Nick.
Yeah.
Still went a little bit long, but.
No, it's good. It's good. And we have a question for you, a quick one, hopefully. Eric is asking if you could repeat who said the quote, "Some people stay dependent long after being set free."
That was Kant. And if you, maybe Nick, you can toss that up there. Mm-hmm. What is enlightenment is the name of the essay. And it was written by Immanuel Kant in the 18th century, 17 something. Yeah, I believe it's 18th century. And it's in the first couple paragraphs there. And Nick, you're about to drop it in the. Yep. Nick's a ninja when it comes to grabbing these resources.
Yeah, I'm looking for a PDF so you can read it in full. Yes. Okay, here's a translation. This should
Here's the one.
There you
I
go.
think it's from Stanford. What is Enlightenment by Immanuel Kant?
Yep.
You got it, Nick?
Yep. 1784 is when he wrote it.
Thank
So
you.
there you go.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yep. So, yeah, altruistic paradox. Thank you for answering that question, Nick.
Yep. Janine is asking a good practical question. Is the price per facilitator training available online? Yes. And in the follow-up email, you'll have a link to a page where you can learn much more about both the way it's structured and the learning outcomes you can expect to receive. We do have early bird pricing available now we actually have our October training available as well. So if you're not able to make July work for either time or budgetary reasons, we have listed the October training as well, so you can take a look at that. I'll go ahead and drop a link to the training event pages.
Yeah, and we have a ton of case studies on our website about how these ideas are being implemented in like city government, Albuquerque city government, like thousands of workers are being trained in this at the city government level. You know, we've got a case study from a college in outside of Los Angeles that we're doing at the leadership level, and how that's impacting the leadership of the college. The case studies of.
I just dropped a link to our case studies. They are categorized into the different kind of education and other industry sectors, things like K-12, community college, university, small business, economic development, and even corrections. That's something we didn't get a chance to talk about, but we have actually seen Ice House implemented with those who are justice impacted, both for reentry programs, but also a really moving interaction Gary had with some folks who were life without chance of parole in a prison in Mississippi that really was impactful and just shows the depth and breadth of this. It's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, that was a very, something, Nick, if you want to let me share my screen for a second. Let me try something just to give you guys a feel for this. Can you see that right here?
Yes, sir.
Let me try it. I don't know how to get this in full screen, but here. So this was a program we did at a maximum security prison in just outside of Oxford, Mississippi, with Dr. Linda Keena. I gave a book talk the night before, but there was about 120 guys involved in this project where they raised money to package ingredients to feed starving kids. And it was one of the most impactful experiences of my life. And just for effect, walking out on the first day, I asked the warden why one guy's wearing green stripes and everybody else is wearing black or grayish stripes. And I was told that the guy with green stripes has the possibility for parole. And, when I was doing that project and I spent a day working alongside these guys in this maximum, like with Shawshank kind of prison, I thought of this idea that Maslow put forth, that when the essence of a person is either suppressed or denied, he gets sick. And sometimes he gets sick in obvious ways, sometimes less obvious, sometimes immediately, sometimes later. But that's what I saw. That's where it really helped clarify my belief that the entrepreneurial spirit is the human spirit. Like we all have a desire to contribute. So
we just got a good question from I'll try to pronounce his name correctly as he's from Austria, Gerald. If you realize an organization is approaching the second point of change, the second break point, but management is not able to adapt the company culture and facilitation of entrepreneurial mindset in time, any suggestion on how to effectively influence top management to take action? That's a big one.
Yeah, that's a big one. Is it Gerald or Gerald? I'm sure I'm not pronouncing your name, and I feel bad because I used to have umlauts in my last name. But it's a good question, and that's why we're in the organizational leadership development. It's I'm going to tell you, like there's a way to think about this that Dr. Land himself said, like nothing fails like success. Like the attitudes and skills that were absolutely essential for you to get where you have gotten are the very attitudes and skills that will prevent you from adapting in the face of change. And if you want to provide yourself with some ammunition, Gerald, I would suggest reading a book by Jared Diamond called Collapse: Why Societies Choose to Succeed or Fail. And what he's essentially saying is the same thing Lance said, which is that, the beliefs to which we cling under inappropriate conditions are those beliefs and values that were once the source of our greatest triumph. So I don't know if there's a way that, mid-level managers can convince the higher ups other than exposing them to a keynote or a workshop or,
What I was going to say is it's typically true that there's not going to be one silver bullet solution. But generally the point, Gary, where you were going with nothing fails like success, while you're in the successful time period where the replication is really working well for you, is when you should be thinking about what happens when things change, because they will. And when we deny that the change is going to happen, that's when we get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Dirk is chiming in saying, we do Ice House for job seekers in Spokane through the state. Hi, Dirk. Yes, I was glad to see you with us. We truly found that the 8 life lessons continually have a positive impact on self-worth as well as employment for those that they're working with, self-employment or otherwise. 93% employed within 6 months of lost employment after going through Ice House with their work. Wow, that's really great, Dirk. That's really great.
Yeah, that's it. Speaks to the workforce development and community. That's exactly it. Like mindset is the missing link. That's kind of how I think about it. Like when a subtle shift in our mindset can have an enormous impact on our life. That's really what the book is all about.
Yes.
How young Clifton Talbert in the Mississippi Delta, goes to work for an unlikely entrepreneur, and it shifts his perspective in a way that completely altered the course of his life. Mm-hmm. That's really what these ideas are about. Like, here's what entrepreneurial thinking looks like. Engage with it as you see fit. Mm-hmm. And I know we're out of time here, Nick, but I was thinking about.
I just said, if you need to go, no worries at all. But if you have any questions for us, Gary and I can hang out for a few more minutes to answer those. Yeah. But go ahead, Gary.
But Nick, I'm always trying to distill these ideas as best I can. And if I have to distill it, it's like this. It's like we want people to understand that there are opportunities in your ambient environment. I don't care who you are, where you came from, or what you have to work with. There are opportunities in your ambient environment within your reach. But these opportunities cannot be seen through a managerial lens. They're latent, and they reside nested in unarticulated needs. And it's the entrepreneurial mindset that enables one to tease these out. So our philosophical idea here is preserve the core of what you're already doing. And maybe this is Gerald's answer, or Gerard, I'm sorry if I butchered the name. It is Gerald. Okay. Preserve the core of what you're doing, but reappropriate some small modicum of your time and effort and thought out on the edges, experimenting and thinking about new ways to make yourself more useful to more humans. That's the Eli method. That's the Ice House method. Mm-hmm. Don't quit your day job. Don't drop out of school. Don't put yourself in financial risk. Don't take on big debt. take $5 and turn it into 50. When you get to 50, turn it into 500. I mean, that's for an individual. But from an organizational level, you've got to allow time. And you know, the idea that I'm sort of grinding away at is that, you know, this hyper focus on efficiency, which is the relic, the remnant of the Industrial Revolution, is at odds with human flourishing, with the planet flourishing. Like, and we need managerial mindsets, but managerial paradigms whose core values are rooted in efficiency and error reduction. These environments are not conducive to exploration and experimentation. So you have to create some space that allows for that. And you can't predict who's going to come up with what.
Exactly.
But if you just create the space out on the margins and encourage the behavior, prepare to be astonished at what happens to engagement, to individual engagement. So that may be another way of thinking about it.
Absolutely. Well, unless there's any last nagging questions for anyone, I think we can call this a close. I will be sending a follow-up email within 24 hours of this time. So tomorrow afternoon, you can expect those, or morning or evening, wherever you are in the world. And you will have the recording as well as the slides in there for you, and some links to things we've talked about throughout the presentation. But if you have any further questions, feel free to email me those. I'm nick@elimindset.com. That's NIC@ELImindset.com. I'm putting that in the chat now, or you can respond to that follow-up email when it goes out tomorrow.
Excellent.
Thank you for being here, Dirk.
Yeah. Thank you guys, all of you guys, for being here. Nick, thanks for your help. I hope this was helpful to you guys, and hope to see you at in some point in the future at our training, at a workshop, at a keynote. Hopefully these ideas have been helpful to you. Look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Definitely. All right, everyone. Bye-bye.